It's my immense pleasure to welcome you all to Sala. Those of you who haven't been here for any other session, South Asian Art and Literature Festival, presented by Art Forum San Francisco, Villa Montalvo Center for Performing Arts, this is where you are, in partnership with Stanford University Center for Southeast Asia and UC Berkeley Institute of Southeast Studies. Today we are here in conversation with Suraj Yengde and very, very eminent ex-editor-in-chief of the LA Times, Davan Maharaj. Welcome, both of you. I'd first like to welcome Dr. Suraj Yengde. He's one of India's leading scholars and public intellectuals, named as one of the 25 most influential young Indians by GQ magazine. Suraj is the author of the best-selling book Caste Matters, which I highly recommend, and co-editor of the award-winning anthology The Radical in Ambedkar. Caste Matters was recently featured in the prestigious non-fiction books of the decade by The Hindu. It's also been translated into 7 languages. He holds a research associate position with the Department of African and African American Studies. His recent appointment was senior fellow at the Harvard Kennedy School. He's a non-resident fellow at the Hutchinson Center for African and African American Research and was part of the founding team of initiatives for institutional anti-racism and accountability at Harvard. His accomplishments go on, but I'd rather have Davan introduce him more further. He's written a lot, spoken a lot, been very active in his young life. Davan Maharaj, as some of you already know, is an internationally renowned journalist who served as editor-in-chief and chief publisher of the LA Times. Under his leadership, the Times won the Pulitzer Prize 5 times, including the prestigious gold medal for public service. He began his career in Trinidad and Tobago, where he won Caribbean Journalist of the Year Prize and top awards for investigative journalism. He has written books. He has won numerous awards for investigation of Southern California probate lawyer who wrote wills and trusts that bequeath millions of dollars to his clients' properties to himself. He has recently edited a special edition of the Michigan Quarterly Review on threats to American democracy. Very, very timely, thank you. And he is on the board of the Kenyan Review and many other boards. I will let you both get started because we have 50 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks for that wonderful introduction. And thank you guys for coming. You know, I have to tell you that as someone who was associated with a very large book and ideas festival, being the LA Times Book Festival, where we had 150,000 people over 2 days and a book awards, I'm so impressed with this festival here. I was telling Ambika she's ready to take this global. You know. I mean, just think about it. I mean, I think Vikram was saying in a session today or last night that the Jaipur festival started with a small number of people, and last year he was talking to like 5,000 people on a panel. So I want to say thank you so much for coming. I know there are many things you could be doing with your fall evening today, you know, especially this crowd. You know, it's Sala college football, but you picked the right one. So Suraj and I, we know each other. We've known each other. We've both. I will get to that, you know. But I want to introduce Suraj first. And some of my factoids of Suraj was stolen. Suraj's resume is so big that it would take a long time. So what I decided to do in a very journalistic way, I decided to break it out in some bullet forms. And some of the ground has already been covered, but I'm kind of a slave to my notes, so pardon that. Suraj has, one, studied in 4 continents: Asia, Africa, Europe, and North America. I know what you're thinking, but we've already admonished the Australians. They might not be into books anyway. Suraj is the first Dalit who got a PhD from the University of Witwatersrand in Johannesburg. I'll get that. In Johannesburg. He has, like you heard, he has academic positions at both Harvard and Oxford universities, 2 small places that you might know about. He's won a raft of awards, including the Dr. Ambedkar Social Justice Award, which is given at Vancouver in Canada, and the Rohit Vemula Memorial Scholar Award. Apart from his scholarship, he's also a human rights attorney, and he got his legal qualifications from institutions in India and the UK. He was named among the 25 most influential young Indians. And as I was reading that list, I said, you had to be fearless to win this because Rishabh Pant is one of them, right? He's been named one of the leading public intellectuals and one of the most prolific non-fiction writers of his generation. Indeed, he has published in the last few years alone, he has published more than 100 essays, articles, and book reviews on ethnicity studies, labor and migration in the global south, and there's probably 100 more in that, very big head of his. And I just don't mean it physically. I'll share a little secret. With all those achievements, the dude is not even 35, not yet 35. So let's hear it for Suraj. The one award they didn't give Suraj is for just a good person and an all-around great guy. And if they did give that award, he'd be at the front of the line. I want to do something different. I've been here and I've been, where you seated for these book panels, and I'm often feel lost, mainly because I would not have yet read the book, and sometimes you get deep into the scholarship or the narrative, and I'm a reader and a writer, but I still get lost. So I decided to help us along by providing some background with Caste Matters, and Suraj is going to fill in a lot of the gaps. First, Suraj breaks with tradition. I'm going to be relying on some other sources, some people who reviewed the book also, and I'll attribute it when I do. He uses several forms several forms of writing and literature to come up with Caste Matters. And let me say from the outset, this is a very important book. All of us should have the courage to read this book. In its review, The Hindu describes Caste Matters. I'm going to hold it up just for picture purposes. As a powerful work that marshals element of traditional philosophy, inquiry, memoir, social anthropology, and cultural studies to activate a narrative primed for a singular agenda, to shift the narrative of caste from something that happens to Dalits and Bahajans, such as reservations and atrocities, to something that upper castes preserve and benefit, but barely acknowledge, end quote. Scholar, you guys will know who this is, Pratap Banu Mehta, calls Caste Matters exactly the kind of mirror India needs to look into. Cornel West, who is an American philosopher and someone that Suraj knows well, and I think you might even consider him a mentor, right? After he read it, he called it an instant classic. While it's a book about caste, Dalits, and human rights, Suraj also focuses, and we'll get into this, on the shortcomings of the Dalit liberation movement. In its review, Scroll India, which I only recently discovered and I'm find very interesting and enlightening. You guys, if you haven't read it, please check it out. I don't know anyone there, so this is a plug for them, but I'm learning a lot. Scroll India said Suraj on Caste Matters makes no bones about calling out Dalits who cause more harm than good to Dalit liberation by wanting to emulate the very people who oppress them. A little bit more background behind the last endorsement of Caste Matters. Suraj and I were both fellows about 3-4 years ago at the Harvard Kennedy School. And one day I was walking across, this is so cliched, you know, the guys from Click and Clack, the radio show, the Tappet Brothers. I was walking across Harvard Yard, and I saw this Satya Sai Baba-like character, you know they say, you know they say when a butterfly flaps its wing in the Amazon forest, it affects the weather like half a world away. Well, Suraj, when his hair flounces, you know, forces everywhere, you know. Can you tell I have hair envy? I had just met Suraj, and we had, you know, I would say we had became instant friends, if not acquaintances then, and we had taken to each other. And I said, dude, where are you going? He says, you know, he told me about a class being taught by 2 Nobel laureates, right? Including, one of them was, you know, the great Indian economist Amartya Sen, right? And I ended up accompanying Suraj to the class and found myself going back, even though I was only picking up less than 20% of what they were teaching, right? But I did learn a lot about the Indians discovering the zero. Very special. Anyway, so earlier this year, that's happened like 3-4 years ago. Earlier this year, on a Sunday, I picked up the New York Times, and I read a review. You know, they usually interview a writer, scholar, thinker about, you know, about thinking and writing. And the interviewer asked this question of this writer, thinker: has a book ever brought you closer to another person or come between you? And this is what Professor Amartya Sen said. Suraj Yengde's recent book, Caste Matters, on the devastating effects of the severe practice of caste distinctions in some parts of India, has made us appreciate more fully how pernicious this type of inequality is. Along with that comes the need for closeness with Dalits, who were relegated as untouchables until recently, and also the moral requirements to question those who have been enjoying and still do unequal political privileges. That quote, the way it was crafted and stated, led me to believe that Professor Sen, one of India's finest minds, contemporary minds, that this book itself was eye-opening for him, right? So I know you get this point. This, like I said, this is a very important book. And like I said, have the courage to read this. Before I pose my first question to Suraj, well, actually, I wanted to talk about one thing. As I was reading the book and I was following, the investigative reporting me was, you know, starting to follow Suraj's social media feed. I saw a group of people sitting on a couch reading it, and it's probably the best picture I could have found to discover a little bit about Suraj's humanity and where he came from. This one was sitting on a couch with Caste Matters faced up like this. I don't know if it was a posed picture or not. I really didn't care. But it was the best set of readers for this book. It was his mother, Ranju, and his grandmother, Sarubai, who probably never imagined one day that their ordinary lives would be told all around the world, right? And to me, that was very moving. Anyway, so ladies and gentlemen, people, I want to tell you, this man, for what he's achieved in a very short life, you think, you know, is something that he should be proud. But I think he's very unaware of it because he keeps pressing on. So I keep in regular contact with him, and he is in a different country every week. Sometimes he's in Bosnia, Croatia, England. He actually now he's honorary. He made it to Trinidad. He was a house guest of my father, who calls him now my youngest and most favorite son. And not only that, they proceeded to send a picture with me, showing me a picture of my father's will that he was given to Suraj. So Suraj, I want to ask you something, because I've been thinking about this a lot. But when did you realize that you had this book in you, these ideas that you wanted to share, with people in India, but with the world?
Thank you so much, everybody, for coming. Shout out to Sala and all the folks. They reached out 2 years ago, I was not sure it's going to be such august audience and it feels like European-esque kind of space, very, very nice, very accommodative, at least for us. I don't know if we change our dress and come, if they might ask us to go away. But Davan, you were speaking so well. I just wanted you to keep speaking, because it's so. It's
that Caribbean accent that you probably like.
I mean, the editor-in-chief of LA Times is endorsing you, and who's a great friend. But also, he gave a warning: don't introduce me to your parents, or else I might be the inheritor of their will. This book, this idea, actually, I was at Harvard by now 3 years, and I had written a proposal for a fellowship with Skip Gates, Henry Louis Gates Jr., the preeminent scholar of African American studies, and also he crosses Africa and all regions, trying to trace the humanity of the dehumanized people. And there is a fellowship by the name of one of my most favorite intellectuals from America, Du Bois. And they have a Du Bois fellowship there. And I wrote a tract almost in my mind, but never on paper. And so I kind of wrote a proposal for it, and I sent it to him, and he said, this is great, let's go ahead and do it. But the first draft that I wrote was very esoteric. It was a very political theory jargon. It was very much rooted in Aristotelian thinking. Heidegger was very much there. I was trying to bring in the experiences of social history into that. And so I pitched this to my publisher, and very kind woman, she just took me out for dinner, because she had to tell me this: I did not understand a word what was written here. Can you please simplify this in a page? And I felt that insulting. I said, no, I'm not going to do it. And then she kept pressing, and then of course that dinner was worth it for her. I ended up kind of writing it and changing, and then the book went through 2 iterations. The first was very thick, deeply footnoted, very much almost inaccessible, and then it took 3 different kind of people to convince me not to do it the way I did it. The first was, of course, publisher. The second was both of our friend Nico Mille, and third was Davan Maharaj. They were like, you have an audience now. You don't want to. And so the third iteration, I remember that summer, is when I kind of toned down and or else the things that you will read and you might have read, I would not have found their way, because there is a certain sense of dogma that attached to that. You always have to sell your experiences so as to become validated. But then there was a shift in thinking. I said that this is an opportunity you would like to perhaps convey to the world that there is a convincing issue at hand, and I think that's how it came about. But I think one reviewer told me a very interesting thing. He told me this book is gonna be an interesting entry point in the many Indian languages, and which it did. The Kerala Malayalam version won the state award, and many other versions are in the process. So I'm quite excited about that kind of audience that I was trying to reach at.
Great. Sala has told some of us that they really want to emphasize at this year's festival the whole idea of humanity. And as I was reading Suraj's book, I found this paragraph. I'm like, well, this speaks exactly to it, but to his experience. So I want to share this paragraph with you, and I also want Suraj to share. Maybe you can read it in your Indian or your Caribbean accent, but to share one of your favorite stories with them. So, Dalit humanism. This is on page 154. Is to claim an equal position. It is argued as a right to be considered at par with other human beings. Dalit humanism does not claim for an unjust subversion of order. Rather, it professes an equal order. It is due to the belief in the other person's humanity that it gives a chance to the fallacies of human deficiency, and aims to establish inequality. Dalit humanity does not contend with having a divided hierarchical order. Rather, it advocates for dismantling the rigid structures that differentiate humanity by affixing its position in society. Dalit humanism is a modernist doctrine with ethical actions diffusing bitterness and hatred and searching for love instead. It really struck me that very early in the book, you talked about Dalit love, right? And I'm thinking, as a journalist who went to South Africa, and right after, Mandela had just stepped down from the presidency, but you don't just turn around, decades and decades of oppression and leaving people psychologically damaged. That's the psychobabble in me. But I would meet with, black African people at social events, or Indian people, or Jewish people, and I came around thinking, wow, this is the suspicion that I had seen, and the psychological, I've also living in the American South, I thought this is the closest thing I had ever seen to the American South. And Suraj, explain to me, we've talked about this very, casually, but explain to me what happens when you have a system that assigns rights and responsibilities and not to some people and not to others.
I think caste is a very it's a very uncomforting, discomforting reality that operates on obfuscations. We have invented so many excuses for its existence. We have, we relish caste, we live in caste, we benefit from caste, we marry within caste, our children's names are given within caste, our relatives and our networks work in caste. We come to America is how caste network works. But caste has really taken on different definitions and the vocabularies that have juxtaposed, replaced, or ameliorated in the way we recognize. And so, when we intervene this is the DNA of every Indian's mindset. They might live in rejection and negation that I don't believe in it and this doesn't matter to it. But if you just go down on a secondary, subsidiary, personal level, social level, communal level, these facts become very apparent. And part of the reason that people would not like to talk about is then they will have to be accountable for the unearned privileges that they have received by the very fact that their accidental womb was supposed to be of someone who was pure and touchable, as opposed to somebody whose womb was sinned, untouchable, and degraded. That's the meeting point of how caste interprets our sense of being. Now, the problem when we look at caste is Brahmins, for example, who have an absolute autonomy when it operates within, less than 4%, 3.5% to 3% of Brahmins, in India at least, have a national income compared to other Indians, 40% of more than anyone else. They control 40% of whatever income. That's a very striking figure. That's a classic apartheid where minorities continue to rule. But Brahmins live under the guise of being a Hindu. And by ascribing a Hindu identity, they relegate all other castes to a subordination. By the very fact one is Brahmin, the other is lower because they are non-Brahmin. There is no challenge and there is no position for a non-Brahmin to exist within the hierarchical vertical system. And when you pose this question and a moral challenge to it, the caste-preserving elites have a disease of finding a fault within the contrarian culture. If it's a chicken and egg debate that they get into, where you really don't get. And the quality of the life of the most oppressed, the most precious, the unsmiled person becomes so visceral for this that the death of a Dalit every third day entering the sewer is what relishes the Brahminical social order we have in India. Every day 10 Dalit women have to be raped for a caste system to be thriving. And yet we see people turning a blind eye, because what happens is there is even in their the caste privileged people are in their victimhood become privileged victims, as opposed to Dalits who became disadvantaged victims. And I think that's a series of binaries that it operate. And in a contextual phase of telling, it kind of translates into politics. Now today when we talk about India's politics or talk about Kamala Harris politics and so forth, there is an element of caste that is operating. If you look at the ruling parties and their titans, this is the house of Brahmin boys. Then if you go become a more feminist and go to Bengal, that is again a Bengali Brahmin woman, Mamata Banerjee. And then you could go down to the communist parties, a bunch of, again, Brahmin actors trying to control the narrative. Yet that doesn't register to us because we have normalized it. The only reason when a person looks at a dominant caste is through assimilating and recognizing it with the normalcy of progress, normalcy of having a new investment in their new startups. The success, merit, and thriving is normalized within the dominant caste phases, while if it's an oppression, degradation, and murder and rape, it is equated with the idea of the lower caste. And I think that's why even today, this is a striking figure, approximately 9,000, now many of us have been to IITs or have networks or IIMs. Let's just throw out the numbers, right? Approximately 8,889 professors are across IITs. So let's round figure 9,000, right? Of them, only 21 belong to the tribal communities. Of the 9,000, only 127 belong to Dalit communities. Now, these are the same people, who would negate any form of social osmosis, and then that gets translated into various spheres. Then you go to job, you get to hiring, you get to practice in temples, gurudwaras, mosques, and other organizations. It gets very much policed. In IIMs, actually, it's much more, 1,000 plus. And within that phase, Dalits are only 8, and there is no Adivasi. And only recently the numbers are coming, there are 2 maybe. So 25% of India's population that is having indigenous roots, they have been producing nation's wealth by becoming the workers and peasants of modern India, don't even have place in the occasions and conventions of this kind. And talk about media. Recently, a survey was, it kind of came out, and that's why you will never hear these stories, because 90% of all the positions, be bureau editor-in-chief, editor, and different kinds of hierarchies on the top who make decisions, 90% of them belong to dominant caste. Of this whole hierarchies, the 25% population, the Dalits or Adivasis, the tribals and the scheduled caste, are absent. They are not there. So what we see is, when we think about this question, we have to really ask that it is not only about advantage, it is about the unequal disadvantage that gets to be distributed and that gets to be punished. An assertive Dalit voice, like myself or many others, have to be put down. A Brahmin student, by the way, I'll just tell you, when this book was out, he sent me, Tiwari somewhere from Wisconsin, trying to reach out and stuff. I don't know what led him to think, he was first very kind and approachable, and this is what he says after some messages: who really wrote your book? And he says, the editor must have done this job for you. Now, this is a student who wanted my recommendation on something, yet has the audacity for a scholar of a certain kind to really think that it's easy for them, and me having to now prove to some nobody to, at least for me. And that just trauma hits you, where then you have to like, what do I do to this now? And you can see this kind of translating into various professions, excluding me to many other people like me.
Thank you, Suraj. I want to, keep going on that for just a little bit, and maybe you can have a really brisk answer to this because we have some more ground to cover. But, you describe casteism, racism as a pathology, and you also say to understand it, for people to understand it fully, especially to those who say, that was a thing of the past, I don't believe in it, it doesn't exist. You have an analogy that you use involving, the treatment of women in society. Can you expand on that for very briefly?
I mean, why don't I read something?
Okay.
I think maybe we can.
Do you have your own copy?
No, I haven't. I was telling Davan, I did not hold this copy of my book in last 2 years. I think, it just got, keep on growing. So let me just find out for the benefit. Why don't I talk about my, or maybe Sarubai,
Yes.
because she's a strong force in my life as she is, if I can find.
So, I can look for it, but maybe you can answer another question in the meantime.
Yeah.
And this probably goes to Sarubai, actually. You talk about growing up, in this very poor neighborhood, and becoming aware of caste when you were really about 10 years old.
Yeah.
Right? Now, I can see people who are treated as outcasts, the whole sense of belonging is part of your daily existence. Can you speak to that while I look for Sarubai?
I mean, I think, it is the everyday negotiation that one has to do to emphasize that one is equal in conversation and not equal. Because the very premise starts with hierarchies that are encoded in the minds, and then to having to tell that there is not such a thing. And this happens to even at the, ivory towers like Harvard, where, people just pass on with this kind of, a very sumptuous berating, where and the idea is that your subordination is most valued. Your assertion is most feared. And for you to live in this principle kind of feeling of what do I do? Principle as in AL is, should I then go and fight with the person, or should I create a space for them to understand that this is not the case? And then it becomes a very taxing exercise, because you cannot have a conversation with someone when the premise is that you are not equal. So no matter how many towers, and this happens if you talk about gender justice today, right? I mean, one can keep talking about all the promotions and all, but the very nature of society is such patriarchal that no matter this structure, as long as it exists, there's going to be a subordination of what is considered weak gender in this formula. The same happens times 10 because there is no register of Dalit stories. I mean, whoever has grown up in India would have rarely read any Dalit author, have rarely seen a celebrated Dalit person. Now, let me ask, how many of you all know Mayawati? How many of you all hate her? Absolutely. Why? Because she's corrupt. She built statues. But nobody will look into what is Mayawati. And one of my disappointments, so Mayawati is, surpassing the Obamas of America the way we see, because there is still an incomparable story. A woman who's born as a Dalit, an outcast, in the den of Brahminism, that is UP, rises to power on her feet and punishes and challenges all these goons, and they are threatened by a strong Dalit woman voice. Now the goons should be afraid. I don't know why the saints are afraid, who keep on reproducing the mythos about Mayavati being a degraded character. And sadly, women from the dominant caste participate in this rhetoric. We have never seen and never understood her story because we never had an opportunity to know. The charitable instances of how we promote someone depends on how comfortable they are going to make us feel, because we don't want to lose that, whatever it is. And I think that's the kind of challenges we have, that we have not known the story of a Dalit. We have only known a story of a Dalit who is coming and cleaning our utensils, cleaning our house, driving us around, and also those who are passing on files in the offices. I think that is the kind of attitude that needs subversion. And that's where I come in.
Yeah. So, Suraj, so in an interview, in a conversation I saw with you and Cornel West, there was a question posed and there was no answer, so I'm gonna push you for an answer. Cornel West actually talked about, the contributions that Hinduism has made to spirituality and has made to civilization, whether it's science or you name it, right? Architecture, understanding, so many other things, mathematics. But he says scholars, and maybe scholars like you, will have to answer, if you take the caste system out of Hinduism, I know some people say, well, that's not Hinduism, but let me finish. The question you have to answer is, what is left? How do you respond to that?
The same question, I think, can be extended to every other faith on the subcontinent. What is left of caste if you remove from their practice, be it Islam, be it Hinduism, be it Brahminism, be it Sikhism, because they have assimilated with this accessible labor that can be raped, that can be tortured, that can be exploited, yet retain the supremacy. So the religion question in India is a very distorted. The very fact that we have so many religions is a challenge to the existence of hegemonic Hindu or Brahminical ideas. Why did Guru Nanak felt of going and establishing a new faith totally 300 years ago that today we celebrate? Similarly, when it comes to the question of Muslims in India, they've been ruling, and this is Kanchalaya who very effectively says, ruled for 700-800 years, but never cared to abolish caste system or untouchability, maintain the fact of their regime. And so did what we see today, the Jat supremacy existing within the Sikh community, where Gurdwaras and all the institutions of power and worship are. So worship in India, spirituality in India, there has to be only a Buddha that comes after so many epochs. And yet, Buddha has to be compromised so that his ideas can be stolen and made ritualized into a different form. And so, what do we do with this question? People don't see, if it's Hinduism or any religion, it's a set of practice, it's a set of belief. But people attach their ego to that practice because with that faith in the religion and all, they are getting unaccounted privileges. They are getting the benefits of being part of that. Because if you're a Hindu and if you're a dominant caste, you don't have to do much. You are a dominant caste. What's your name? X, Y, Z. And that's it. That establishes the equation. Even in Muslims, the hierarchy that has been created, the last names have written. The Christians, for example, in fact, more than 80% of Christians in India are Dalits. We don't even know the statistics. Yet the dominant caste Brahmins who are running the private institutions and educating all kinds of people belong to the dominant caste convert. And that was the whole Catholic mission of the Portuguese. So the question of faith is so rooted in it's actually every faith has its role in retaining caste. And so what do we do with that? Should we abolish spirituality and faith? I think there is a way for one to be accountable, yet profess a sort of liberation that will liberate themselves. Because every faith talks about self-liberation. But here it's about self-preservation, which is a very kind of capitalist idea that is creating fungus to this own mind.
Yeah. Now you talk about the Dalit middle class, right? And the Dalit, other categories of Dalit. I couldn't tell if you formed these categories yourself or if they existed before.
Mayavati's mentor was Kanshiram, one of the magics that India's democracy created. Now, Kanshiram wrote a book. Kanshiram was basically a Punjabi, belonged to a Chamar community, worked in down in Maharashtra, and came from Dalit community and thought about the liberation of his people. And then he was a scientist, as a scientist would do. He went on to do some research about this, and then it was his categories where he identified various forms of problematics that existed within the Dalit community.
Suraj, so, of course, this is a big issue, and we're not going to solve it here tonight. But the question individuals often ask is, what can they do, to like bring awareness to the, the problem that persists in their own way? You talk about Facebook groups and people getting on those things and saying, stuff that, and you talk about your own experience with that. Can you actually have a whole chapter on Brahmins against Brahminism, right? Which was the last chapter in the book, and it deals with some of that. But can you, to someone who's trying to grapple with this and who wants to make a difference, I know it's bigger than one person, can you speak to that?
I think, there is also, unfortunately, among the dominant caste people, wrong ancestors are given as role models. There have been good ancestors who never feature in the memories, histories, rituals, worships among the Brahmins and other dominant caste people. There have been legendary examples of people who sought to challenge, fight, and rebuke caste, who belong to the dominant caste as well. Yet, if I ask a Brahmin kid, they will think these are non-Brahmins or these are people not belong to community. Now there is a famous, in Maharashtra, there is a Chakradhar Swami. He is having a large following, and also if you go to Karnataka, the Lingayata Dharma founder. These were born as so-called Brahmins, but they revolted against Brahminism. Then Brahmins shunned them because they revolted against the hegemonic powers. What one can do, and this was basically, I was in Northeast America, I was looking at white liberals or so-called radicals, and they would take on the mantle of fighting white supremacy. We haven't yet had records of Brahmin groups identifying as Brahmins who are saying, we will challenge Brahminical supremacy, we will challenge caste. And I think that's the kind of work one needs to do instead of occupying Dalit spaces. And I think there is so much to be done where one can even start becoming what I call cultural suicide bomber in their communities and in their various forms of social and professional organizations.
Yeah. Thank you, Suraj. And yeah, this is a question from the audience that I was going to ask, but I'll try to do right by the audience and ask it. How do we build solidarity across identities in India, Dalit, Bahujan, Adivasi, Muslim solidarity, in the US and the world, Dalit and Black solidarity? How do you build solidarity? And you and I have been talking about your own role in helping to build this solidarity.
Every liberation has to have allies. And we also need people who can go and talk to their dominant caste colleagues and their relatives, and they have to do the job of educating them. They have to do the job of becoming the ones who's going to create many problems for there, because a form like caste and its oppression cannot exist while we are here. As I say, by the time we hit the bed, there are 10 Dalit women across India have been sexually harassed, molested, raped. And I think that is the kind of unsettling system that we cannot let it pass by. We have to make the society accountable, and it's not that you're going to go make changes. The changes are to start within families. And believe me, you're going to be outcasted, but you are going to join the lineage of those legendary ancestors of yours who have done the great job of falling in the right path, as opposed to those who are not even registered and recorded, who came and died and nobody knows about them.
So I think we leave it at that. I know there are other questions. I had a few, and I know you had a few. So thank you so much for coming, and we really appreciate it. And we hope you leave here with some better understanding of Suraj's work and his ideas today. Thanks again.